All right, we're going to continue on with the cat. We're going to start with visceral and parietal. That's something people have a lot of little hang-ups on, and it's no big deal. One thing I want you to keep in mind is that when we talk about visceral, we're really talking about what is covering the organ. That would be the key word. So say, for example, I have got a pin right here in this lung. Of course, we got fancy words for everything, so we're not going to call it lung, we're going to call it pleura. Okay, so if the question was asked, what serous membrane covers this organ? Because they're not even going to give you a hint of like what you're looking at. Well, you heard cover the organ, so you're going to think visceral. That's going to be the first thing that's going to come to mind. And then you're going to add your $10 word of, instead of lung, pleura, so visceral pleura. If I have it pinned right here, and they say, what serous membrane covers this organ? Notice I say cover this organ again, and I'm talking about a serous membrane. It's going to be visceral pericardium. Pericardium is that $10 word for heart. Peri, P-E-R-I, means like perimeter or peripheral. It means all the way around. And so cardium, of course, like cardiovascular. So visceral pericardium, okay? If I have, say, down here on the spleen, okay, and it says, what serous membrane is going to cover this organ? You, first of all, cover the organ is visceral, and then I'm going to say peritoneum. So visceral peritoneum. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit more sense there. Now, another way they could word this, let's say we have it pinned right here again, carefully read the question. Now it's going to say something like, what serous membrane lines this cavity? Line the cavity means parietal. Now we're talking about that outer layer. Okay, remember that these organs basically have their initial serous membrane, some fluid that's going to reduce friction or anything like that, and then you have your outer layer. Okay, the outer covering is going to be parietal. So if it says, what serous membrane lines this cavity, you're going to say parietal pleura. Okay. Another thing I want to make sure you understand is the difference between region and quadrants. All right. So quadrants, just like it means, like four, quadrant, or like just four. So you're going to have like lower right quadrant, upper right quadrant, upper left quadrant, lower left quadrant. When we say right and left, we're always talking about the patient's right and left, not your right and left. And I know that's a little tricky at first, but you'll get used to it. The other thing that you're going to hear is regions. That's going to be that tic-tac-toe board, all right? And so what I want you to kind of think about is like right in the center where you have your belly button, we're going to use a fancy word, umbilicus. Right in the center is the umbilicus. Above it is going to be your epigastric. Epigastric, and that makes sense because like epi is above and gastric is kind of like stomach. And then below is hypo. Hypo sounds low, it is, so hypogastric, okay? Now the deal is a lot of people get it confused about the whole hypo. So my little tidbit is you can't have 3 hypos in a row, okay? You just can't have 3 hypos in a row. So then you know up here is where your other like hypochondriacs are. And then right here is your lumbars. And then right here is your iliacs, right and left. So hopefully that clarifies that. All right, so now we're ready to actually get into the organs since we've gone through planes, cavities, visceral, parietal, quadrant, region. I don't know why y'all are confused, but let's keep going. No, really, it's a lot. Okay, so this guy right here that has those little stripes on him, that is the windpipe, but don't put windpipe, it is the trachea. And that's where the air is going to come down and inflate the lungs, all right? Now, deep to the trachea is this garden hose. That's the esophagus. All right, that's where the food's going to go down. And so basically think about it like that. Be deductive reasoning. This is respiratory system. This is digestive system. All right, coming on down. Now we're in the thoracic cavity, and you see these little flaps. You know what they are. They're the lungs. All right, they are lateral to the heart. The heart is medial to the lungs. This is your heart. Inside your heart, you have 4 chambers. All right, they might ask about those chambers. What I like to think about is, I know this is like a little diamond shape, but A atrium, V, ventricles. So you have 2 atriums on top. I believe in your lab manual it says atria. That's singular for, or atrium. It's like singular or plural, so don't let that shake you up. Atrium, ventricle. All right? I'd have to dissect this for y'all to see that. Obviously cardiovascular, respiratory. Then we have the diaphragm. A lot of good questions come from the diaphragm. We could ask what cavity it's in, and of course you would say ventral. They might say what system or systems it's a part of, and you would say respiratory and muscular. This is a really beautiful muscle that helps us breathe. It's going to push those lungs up and down 24/7, 365 days a year. All right, so that takes care of that. Underneath it, I want you to take a really close look at this. Looks like a shoestring, doesn't it? Yeah, this is a good testable item here. This is the falciform ligament. Always looked over, Falciform, falciform ligament. It's at the very bottom of one of those lab pages. Kind of sneaky, but testable. Falciform ligament. It actually holds the liver up. The liver is not really connected to anything. It's just like hanging off of the diaphragm, and it would roll to your toes if it was not connected to the diaphragm. All right, so now I've answered that. Here in our right upper quadrant, we have the liver. If you open up a little peekaboo, we've got the gallbladder. This is all digestion. If I come over here, I'm going to find this pouch that is the stomach, that's digestion. If I go lateral to the stomach, I'm going to find the spleen. A good question on the spleen would be like, what system or systems are the spleen a part of? Well, it's a graveyard for the red blood cells and the white blood cells. So red blood cells is going to be circulatory, white blood cells is going to represent the lymphatic. So the system that the spleen is part of is lymphatic and circulatory. You could also use the word cardiovascular instead of circulatory, and that's what makes A&P so frustrating, because there's 10 words for one thing. All right, this beautiful apron right here, beautiful fatty apron, this is the greater omentum. All right, another really good test question, as it covers our guts. Okay, we're going to pull the greater omentum way back. We're going to go deep to the stomach, and we're going to find this guy. Now look at this. That looks like a piece of fajita meat, or I know I'm going to ruin your appetite. Chewed up bubble gum, something. And this one's really beautiful. The tail is still connected to the spleen, and the head is connected to the very first part of our small intestines. Guess what this is? I know, you said pancreas, and you were right. All right. They might ask you to identify it, or they might ask you like, what system or systems is this part of? And you would say, yeah, I know this. It's endocrine and digestion. All right, endocrine because the whole insulin and glucagon deal, and then it's digestion because it gives us enzymes that are going to help us digest our food, which makes sense because it's hooked up there to the small intestines. All right, so this looks like funnel cake. It's not funnel cake. It is your small intestines. I know I'm going to ruin appetites. We like to say DJ ice because we have D for duodenum or duodenum. Sometimes you'll find a cat in a lab practical where they cut out the liver, and people get kind of confused. Everything looks different. But look, here's your stomach, and then here's where your stomach is going to push out that food so we can start digesting. So the very first part, that's a good one to be pinned. Maybe they'll pin it all the way up here, maybe they'll pin it here, and they'll say, what part of the small intestines are we at, or whatever. And that's the duodenum, duodenum, duodenum. I don't care how you pronounce it, just know how to spell it. All right, the middle part is the jejunum, and then at the end, you're going to find like this greater circumference down here compared to this. Small intestines, large intestines. So the last part is the ileum. All right. If I fan out the small intestines, I see this really beautiful cellophane wrapper thing. That's the mesentery. Okay, another really good question, mesentery. All right. Then we have the large intestines. The large intestines essentially has two parts. You have the cecum, that's the first part, and then the end of it is the sigmoid. All right. If I look on the back side, I will find these little beans right here, and those are the kidneys, part of the retroperitoneum. All right, you got one on both sides. Another thing that I kind of want to point out is this large intestines. By the way, large intestines colon is the same thing. Right here is your cecum, and then you got this little pill thing. That is the appendix. That's very good testable material, all right? So you got the cecum, and then you're gonna have ascending, transverse, descending, and then on the back side, the sigmoid down to the rectum, all right? This particular cat doesn't, it must have had its bladder cut out, but usually you would see like a little pouch down here, and that would be the urinary bladder. Other than that, they're probably going to ask questions on models as far as, like if I look at this kidney, right above the kidney, I have the adrenal gland, okay? The adrenal gland is part of the endocrine system, all right? So kidney, ureters, the lines from the kidney to the bladder, this guy has a missing bladder as well, and then know that the urine is going to exit out of the urethra, all right? Another thing I want to point out on Mr. Torso is the blue line at the neck is your jugular, and then the red line at the neck is the carotid. All right, sometimes that's good testable material. Also notice at the neck we have the thyroid. I just want to say this, and you can take this information for what it is. You would have to have a little baby model, and you would see what looks like a chewed up bubble gum on top of the chest right about here. That would be the thymus. Okay, so please picture that, a little baby model and a little piece of chewed up bubble gum right there at the chest. That would be the thymus. Adults tend to have such broken down thymus that it's not going to show up on an adult. So if you see the big guy torso, you know that this is the thyroid, okay, and you'd have to see a little baby model, a little lower down to see the thymus, carotid, jugular. All right, so I hope that helps.